Hi, this is Tom Salemi of DeviceTalks. I'm here at 160 Studios. We're here to talk about the state of medtech. We're going to cover a lot of topics. We've covered a lot of topics. Right now, we're going to focus on the state of medtech markets. Of course, we'll be talking about all of this at DeviceTalks Boston on April 30th and May 1st at the BCEC, in particular, the rise of ASCs. So to get us all ready and warmed up and informed for those conversations that will happen in Boston, I'm here with my friends Joe Mullings and Holly Scott. Thanks for having me down here to talk about some important stuff.
Always great having you here, Tom.
Thanks for coming.
So let's talk about, we love talking about medtech companies and medtech devices, but let's talk about the end users, the customers, and the state of the medtech markets. The state of hospitals, in terms of being, they're under some duress, for sure. And medtech companies are finding ways to respond. Joe, give us an assessment of where we are with the hospitals. We'll talk about ASCs separately, but how are hospitals doing and how are they as customers for medical device companies? How has that been changing?
Well, I think if you solicit any of the salespeople, it's a horrible environment.
Really?
Yeah. So where they used to have reasonable access to decision makers, meaning the clinicians, interventionalist surgeons, and care team, it's just not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that unless you have a very high clinical need in regards to a procedure like a heart valve or in the ICU, CCU, where you need clinical bedside support from the organization's rep, you're not getting access there anymore. And now what you're doing is you're selling against budget and you're selling against administrators, not selling against clinical evidence anymore. So that's become a really hostile environment. And then the CapEx environment, hospitals are still reeling from the 2020 to 2023 COVID situation. And that CapEx budget is just not there at the rate it used to be. They're sitting on CapEx a lot longer. And then I know you're going to go into it, but that outpatient surgery center and that ASC and hospitals are opening their own ASCs and outpatient. So the hospital is no longer making the CapEx decision to go into the hospital. They're saying, well, let's pause. Let's look at budgets out here. And they have an advantage because they're getting a reimbursement rate in a hospital at an outpatient surgery center and better than an ASC. So they're starting to make business decisions outside the four walls of the hospitals, especially on the CapEx side of things. So that's where we're seeing that, and companies are really struggling there in order to address that, and there's a lot of frustration on the commercial front line.
Yeah, it's interesting over the last number of years we've seen such investment going into digital diagnostics, and one of their number one value spokes on their pitch is keeping them out of the hospital or getting them out of the hospital or getting them home and moving them outside of those walls, because the ability to diagnose and monitor now with the tools that we have is allowing for fewer hospital stays, is allowing for false heart attacks to go home and and be treated in different ways. So the model of raising money is highly tied to keeping them away from the hospital and keeping them away from that type of critical care. And it's not exclusively, as it was, just the cost of hospital stay. It's the cost of getting it into that cycle, that vortex, because value-based care overall is still incredibly complex. So the easier you can manage by keeping them out and then having a trail of service. Okay, let's just go home and monitor this person. They've got a patch now. We're seeing incredible opportunity. Why do you think Boston Sci is betting on their arrhythmia franchise? I mean, this is just a huge opportunity.
Unbelievable. So let's talk about the rise of ASCs. We'll have a panel again at DeviceTalks Boston. We'll have representatives from Olympus and Medtronic and a physician and some others talk about the state of the market there. Joe, where are we with first let's talk about ASCs. Give us a brief synopsis of what they are. How did they fit into healthcare? And then we can get into how that role is changing.
Sure. So when you think about an ASC, that's a facility that the patient can't stay in more than 23 hours and 59 minutes in, basically, right? There's no overnight stays there. So what that does is that generally would push you to the sort of stratification of a patient and complexity. Those usually and primarily were ortho-driven for most of their tenure until the last couple of years. But that was, you went in the morning, you got your procedure, you went home at night. And that was based on the patient profile and risk assessment, and also the complexity of the case. Low complexity, mid complexity, high complexity. High complexity, high risk patient, always in the hospital. So that then started to say, okay, we can run these ASCs, but the issue with ASCs outside of ortho was you were still trying to run it as a remote hospital. And what is becoming very clear are the staffing issues happening in the ASCs right now. That is their number one issue. Out of all the ASCs, 45% of the surveyed ASC owners were staffing. I can't find staffing, predictive staffing, or skilled staffing. So if you don't have the staffing in there to run those, you could no longer run your procedures through at a high enough volume for them to be profitable. So what we see happening is it's like hiring a person in a startup versus hiring a person in a large corporation. They're two different psychographics, right? The startup person enjoys that high agility, change, high volume activity, where, again, I'm generalizing here, where the hospital is, I'm getting in at 9, I'm leaving at 5, I'm punching my card, I'm just doing enough, and my success is not tied to the revenue of the hospital directly. Where in the ASCs they are. So the device companies that are going to do well in the ASCs are going to address pre-op, intra-op, and post-op activities, efficiencies, turn times, actionable data on the administrative economic side, not necessarily the clinical side. The ability to manage that patient all the way through. They're usually run by private equity. Private equity has a bunch of Harvard MBAs and Yale MBAs, and right, who watch the numbers and track. Doesn't happen as much in a hospital. So the med device companies that are moving into the hospitals right now, and you mentioned it in our earlier sit, Stryker, and Zimmer's also doing it, they are focusing on how are we partnering with you and how are we helping you push those cases through, not just talking about clinical evidence. How do we become an efficiency partner to you and a data provider to you that you could run your dashboards financially, administratively, clinically, care team-wise, that you can prove there's efficiencies there. And that's where you're going to have that evidence-based partnership with the med tech companies. You're not going to be able to hide in like you can in a hospital.
Yeah, I don't think we should ignore the growth, too, of concierge medicine. That's an interesting area that, in my experience, I haven't seen nearly the activity as I have in the last 2 years. There's a lot more attention going on to that particular market because it's growing and because that patient population has money. So if we're looking at the patient population who is working within the concierge chain, they tend to be okay paying out of pocket for going back to CRM tools, patient management tools, at-home therapies, those types of opportunities. So that's creating interesting possibilities in medtech overall that really is fairly new.
Tom, also the ASCs, you're going to have a much higher adoption rate in the ASCs with new digital technologies than you are in hospitals.
Why is that?
Because first of all, you have 1 or 2 key decisions to make in an ASC, a much smaller footprint. When you're going into a hospital, you've got an entire IT department. You can test a brand new digital technology in an ASC a lot more quickly. Once you go into a hospital and they've been burned once by one telepresence type of play because it took an entire army to get it deployed, it's not like trying a new catheter where you put it in the interventionalist's hands like, this seems good, right? And then throw it out, try another one. So you're going to start to see these digital efficiencies come in, again, whether it's surveillance, whether it's patient monitoring, whether it's smart implants, like in the case of Zimmer with the Canary relationship, where you're going to start to be able to track the patient pre, intra, and post-op, and that's going to be part of the care continuum. And those companies will be able to pull the trigger a lot quicker on sterilization products that hospitals don't care as much about. Those ASCs do, because you don't have to carry inventory or necessarily have sterilization processes on premises. So these single-use scopes is an example that you see coming out. So I think you're going to see a lot higher adoption rate in there. The scary part, though, is other than 1 or 2 companies, Stryker, and again, I'll go back to Zimmer's trying now, they have not focused enough on how do you sell to the ASC model. because there's a lot more of a scattered environment versus a big brick monolithic building in the middle of town, which we call a hospital. So there's going to be a lot of land grabbing opportunities there for the organizations that'll take a little bit of a haircut in the beginning, but once they get their boots into that ASC model, they're going to make it very difficult for the competitors to come in.
Do medical device companies have to design devices to fit into the ASCs better? Is it the same medical device, you're just sort of repackaging and selling some different software with it at the end of development? Or is the rise of the ASCs as a market going to change how products are designed and developed?
Well, I think you're going to have less of an inventory required because you don't have the same sort of clinical risk in an ASC. So that's one. On the digital side, imaging equipment, yeah, you've got, whether it's robot, whether it's a portable MRI machine, you need a smaller footprint, and you need something that can move from OR to OR. You can't necessarily, in today's ASC, dedicate ORs and have a big, Da Vinci 5 sitting in the middle of an OR because you only have 5, 7, 8 ORs that in a good size ASC that you can move around. You need the agility and the movement there. And again, you don't have the same clinical risk or complexity in the procedures you're doing there. I think your towers will stay the same. Your obviously back table disposables will stay the same. But when it comes to the CapEx side or the sterilization issue, single use on devices that otherwise needed to be sterilized is a big opening to go after right now.
Holly, do we see this rise of different markets, the ASCs, the existing hospitals, and you mentioned even things like concierge medical? These are all different opportunities for startups, but also having these different markets introduces complexity. So is it a positive that we're seeing all these different types of markets open up, or is it going to cause med device companies, maybe even startups, to lose focus because they don't know where they're going to be selling?
To use Joe's line, yes and yes, right? So we've seen it because I've seen a number of young companies that have really struggled over, let's just say 10 years, where they could have, if they started today, could do what they're trying to do in 3, knowing the lessons learned along the way of the various paths that they can explore and where the revenue is. And also the investors are getting more sophisticated, understanding the ASC potential. If a surgical company isn't thinking about ASC in their early stage design development or the opportunity there and their markets, they're not going to get very far. There's a much more loaded ask on the early side of where that market lies, and that's where it comes back to the phenotype that we hire. They've got to be creative business people. They've got to understand the dynamics of the landscape. If you just want to go out and talk hospital, you're going to be dead in the water.
Yeah, and the reimbursement in ASC is tremendously different also. So you've got to really be able to address that in that partnership model. So I think what you're going to start to see is bundling come back in to vogue in the ASC, where you can have that opportunity to bundle and cover as much as possible in that ASC. So it's the lifetime value of the customer versus the asking price for a device. And that is where we're going to start to move. So you're going to see these multi-threat solutions start to come into the organizations that address that early and will bundle out others in there. And the private equity owners are going to expect that.
By multi-threat, you mean?
Multi-threat meaning that, let's say I'm in the stack business. So I'm either a Storz or Fuji or Olympus or Stryker, right? Well, I'm going to try and figure out where in the ASC I can sell other collateral devices that are around that, so I become a multi-threat where maybe my margin on that in a hospital is a lot different than it is here, but I'm able to bundle a lot more. So out of that ASC, I get a revenue number that is higher because I'm able to offer them a Medline type product portfolio on top of my high-tech products. And so I think you're going to start to see some of these partnerships come in because you've got the rails to run in on, and you're going to make these other acquisitions. Like, again, we come back to Kevin as one of the better CEOs in the industry. Stryker, I think, so far is doing the right thing in this ASC model, and others are struggling to follow it because they're trying to take their hospital sales model and just flip it over to an ASC, and it's not the same thing.
Is this level of complexity in the customer in healthcare, it feels new. Is it new? I mean, in the past, medtech companies sold primarily to the hospitals. We're seeing so much more variety of customers now. Has it always been this complicated? Because I hear you both talk, and I'm like, my God, like how do you're creating these devices, you're not even quite sure how you're going to, you're developing a plan for how you want to sell it, but that may change in 3 to 5 years. Holly, is this whole market changing at a rapid pace?
Yeah, I think it's a classic case of it's gradual until it's sudden.
Yeah.
You know, I do believe that, look, if we go back to 2020, that changed everything, and that's only 5 years.
Yeah,
so
good point.
that is an enormous catalyst, coupled with the exorbitant costs of healthcare, coupled with the fact that the hospitals aren't making money. All of these things have been a perfect storm of dramatically changing the complexity of the commercial models, or revenue models, I should say. And I will tell you, within the functional areas that we support, the person driving commercialization has been the one that has changed the most in terms of what we're asked for now versus what we were asked for 10 years ago. Would you agree, Joe?
Yeah, I'd agree. And you know, we're also solving different problems now, Tom. Right. So before, we would have a plumbing problem, or an electrical problem, or a architectural problem, orthopedics, vascular, right, or EP, on the problems we were solving. And then we got good at solving those problems, so then we started to expand out, what else can we solve? And then we started creating these other product platforms that are way more sophisticated. Oh, by the way, now we're in a digital environment, where just 20 years ago it was an analog environment. And so it's becoming more sophisticated. Oh, let's put a brand new site of care on the map now too. And so, you know, it's always going to get more complex. And then on the other side, you have the external pressures. You got supply chain pressures. You got cost pressures, right? You got reimbursement being reduced. You got costs going up, and you have the global issue of tariffs and everything else being pushed on. So, you know, I don't fancy the poor CEO,
right,
that she's got to sit there and make these decisions 7 years ahead of when something may hit.
Yep.
You know, like we're watching two of the strategics die on the Hill with Otava and Hugo. I keep coming back to that. Every single one of them would not have made that decision 12 years ago, because the decision was sound back then. But so much has changed since then. Like, you're sitting there going, again, if you get on the wrong train, get off as soon as you can.
Great way to end this. Now, MedTech is all about changes and accommodating and innovating. So we're seeing a lot of that, and we'll be talking a lot about that at DeviceTalks Boston. So thanks for your insights on that today.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.